Is knife crime surging? Is violent crime surging? We've had some politicians suggest exactly that over the last few days. So that's why it's important to put this in overall perspective. And the violent crime in Britain is not just falling, but is cut, broadly speaking, in half in the last 2 decades.
So, as we've been reporting, the stabbing of a 14-year-old boy in Peterborough is being investigated as part of the investigation into the mass stabbing on a high-speed train on Saturday night. Police say it's one of 3 knife-related incidents in the city believed to be connected to Anthony Williams. The 32-year-old has been charged with 10 counts of attempted murder. And in the last hour, the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, gave a statement in the Commons.
I am sure I speak for everyone in this House when I say that my thoughts today are first and foremost with the victims, with their family and their friends, and all those who experienced this terrifying attack. My deepest thanks go to the emergency services, the British Transport Police, Cambridgeshire Police, Cambridgeshire Fire and Rescue and the East of England Ambulance Service. The speed of their response as well as their skill and professionalism were exemplary. I would also like to pay tribute to the breathtaking bravery of those on the train itself, including the heroic acts of the passengers and train crew who intercepted the attacker. I would like to draw particular attention to one member of the onboard crew who ran towards danger, confronting the attacker for a sustained period of time and stopped his advance through the train.
Shabana Mahmood there in the Commons. Now, the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp, pushed his counterpart to commit to a strong clampdown on knife crime.
Does the Home Secretary agree that knife crime and knife homicide are still too high and we must do yet more? Does she agree that more knife crime offenders should go to jail? This is important because when offenders are in jail, they of course can't attack the public. Does she agree we need to ensure more people who carry knives, especially where they use them to threaten others, are jailed? I know of course there are pressure on prison places, but by deporting more of the 10,000 foreign nationals in prison, we could create more space.
The Conservative spokesman, Chris Philp. Now let's welcome first of all Fraser Nelson, Times columnist. Hi to you, Fraser.
Hi, John.
Fraser, welcome. Do share your thoughts on this. Clearly it was an awful incident. It was a shocking incident. And anxiety in the public is only to be expected. But it is still possible, Fraser, isn't it, for the broader significance, to be blown out of proportion.
Yeah. Well, atrocities like these are so rare, people are going to be remembering this in a generation's time. And of course it sends shockwaves over the country. People try to make sense of this and understandably ask, is this part of a bigger trend? Is knife crime surging? Is violent crime surging? We've had some politicians suggest exactly that over the last few days. So that's why it's important to put this in overall perspective. And the violent crime in Britain is not just falling, but is cut, broadly speaking, in half in the last 2 decades. The knife crime that Chris Philp was talking there is gone down by something like a third over the last 5 years. And that's if you go by, not by crime surveys, but by NHS data on who's admitted to hospital for knife attacks. It's something like the lowest in 25 years. So this is the paradox here. The acts of violence, they're very high profile and they get shared, and quite right, true. This is a shock that will horrify everybody in the country, but it's not a proxy for what's happening in Britain as a whole. It's against a backdrop of the situation where violent crime has been falling for quite some time.
Yes, and it is naturally a source of anxiety among people. And there's the facts of life, which is that it's a characteristic of the press and the media to harvest reactions of alarm and also gather policy responses, which are often impractical, even disproportionate.
Yeah, there's always this instinct for the politicians to act, to change a law, to kind of to ban something, to crack down on this, crack down on that. I mean, again, it's natural instinct, so it can be difficult to step back. And by the way, I mean, Chris Philp is quite right in what he says. Knife crime is still too high. Any violent crime is too much violent crime. More can be done on stop and search, and the figures indicate that when officers do stop and search, that they find weapons a strikingly high number of times, suggesting that there's a lot more to go in there. So of course, it's the natural instinct of society always to want to do better. We're also seeing some commentary, bizarrely, again, linking this to immigration. Of course, we know the man arrested was a British national. But when you look back in the last 2 decades, you can see immigration more than double, the number of immigrants in the country more than double, while the crime is cut in half. So it's difficult to find a correlation there either. So at times like this, it's time, you of course think about and pray for the relatives, and think about those affected in this is tragedy. But this is not on the backdrop of a country where violent crime is anything like out of control. Violent crime is going in the other direction.
Yes. I mean, you mentioned stop and search because the Conservative Shadow Home Secretary just a short while ago was saying triple the use of stop and search. And yeah, stop and search as a police instrument has detected and prevented crime. There's no arguing with that. But the idea of widespread use of stop and search across the rail network, that would be an altogether different proposition and raise and magnify the big questions which are in play.
Well, of course, and that's why you should leave police to make these operational decisions. I mean, the indications are that they're using their stop and search powers quite wisely in the area where people are most likely to carry knives, not where politicians tell them that they should go. And I think that ought to be the response here, to give the police powers they need, to listen to them if they want to, use them a bit more. I mean, stop and search has been an effective tool, but only when you allow police to use it judiciously.
Yeah, and just lastly, Fraser, social media, and what can you say, what can anyone say or do about social media with its obvious capacity to turn a concern into alarm, and alarm into fear, and fear into panic?
Well, this is exactly the problem. Right now, when you look at the opinion polls and ask people, is crime going up? Most people think that it is. Now, that's not surprising when you see instances, not just horrific incidents like this that will rightly ricochet up and down the whole country, but far smaller episodes of shoplifting, of violent crime are being shared so much on social media now that it can give this false perception of violent crime getting a lot worse. Now, if you get your news from social media, as about half of the country does, this is a very clear impression that you get. It can be quite difficult to step back, look at the figures, and actually ask, what do the hospital figures show? These are real figures. So I think violent crime is something which people are rightly concerned about. And social media will play to people's concerns. You can come up with a narrative there, whether you want to link it to immigration or anything you want, that can get very, very far with tens, hundreds of thousands of shares without any danger of encountering any facts. But the facts do show that our country is safer than it's been for quite some time.
All right, Fraser Nelson, Times columnist. Great to talk to you as always. Now let me welcome now to Drive Dal Babu, former Chief Superintendent at the Metropolitan Police. Welcome to the show, Dal.
Good afternoon, John.
Afternoon to you. Just share your thoughts on this incident overall, first of all, Dal.
Oh, it's a shocking incident, but in 40 years of policing, I've been involved in policing. I've never known another incident like this. So I think we need to all put this into perspective. Horrific as it is, and it's terrible, and I'm not devaluing it in any shape or form. If any of us were on that train experiencing a man with a knife attacking people and not being able to get off the train, it would have been horrific, and was indeed horrific. But it's one instance. I can't think of another instance like this in all the time I've been involved in policing, and I think we'd be hard pushed to find another incident like this. And so issues like this become amplified. They're horrific, and we can't help but think, well, what would have happened if I was there, or a member of my family, or sort of. So I think those issues come up, but I think we need to put things in perspective and make sure that when we look at solutions, we do it in a measured way, and it's not a knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah, it was an awful incident, but of course that context is also important. In your own mind, as you say, an experienced former officer, what more could police do within practical constraints?
Well, British Transport Police, unlike the other forces, is actually funded by the railway companies. So I think there's something here, a very, very difficult question around what do members of the public want and what do the shareholders of these private companies want. I mean, I would like, as a punter who uses the railways quite regularly, I use that particular line when I get on my bike and go out of London for a bike ride in and around Cambridgeshire. I would like to see guards going up and down, checking tickets and making sure that it makes it all feel safe. So do we do that, or do we have driver-only trains? I think that's one aspect. And then I think we've had a lot of debate around metal detectors. Who's going to police them? What's stopping you going around it? Railways have multiple entries. I think that's really not a really well thought idea. And the idea that we do mass stop and search. Anybody who's been on trains at mainline stations will know how busy they are, and so that doesn't seem to be very practical. So I think it's about making sure we do things. And for me, It's about British Transport Police having more resources, more officers, and perhaps the companies thinking about having guards on train, because it was 8 minutes before from the time that 999 call was made to the person being detained. And I think, in that respect, it was and remember, this was a moving train, and so the police officers had to go. The driver coordinated the train to go to Huntingdon, near Cambridgeshire, and then the guard on the train, who by all accounts was incredibly brave,
Yes,
and made sure that what he could do to protect passengers. There were two different roles done by two different people.
I'll just for a moment develop the thought about guards on each train, because they're not trained, are they, to physically intervene if someone is behaving violently, even lethally violently on a train. What is the particular merit of that idea? Is it about maybe just raising the alarm in a prompt manner? They'd be trained to do that.
Yeah. So it's in essence, it's about reassurance. It's about having guards when it's appropriate. I mean, it's certainly not going to be appropriate to have police officers on every single train, but it may well be very, very difficult to have guards on every single train. But I think, having them, it gives people a degree of reassurance. We saw a huge number of police officers in and around train stations today. That was all about reassurance and giving people some confidence. And I think we just need to really think again around when we're looking at driverless trains, whether that's the right way, given the important role that both the guard and the driver play, two very separate roles, but two roles that were incredibly important.
And were praised rightly by the Home Secretary and the Shadow Home Secretary. Just a word on a stop and search. Speaking to a former senior officer who had pretty serious doubts about that. What's your view?
Yeah, I think it's people talk about stop and search as being the panacea, but actually the reality is most stop and searches get a positive result in terms of drugs. So the stop and search rate for weapons is very low. So I think that, again, you end up with politicians' knee-jerk reaction, talking about things which they don't necessarily have operational experience of or an understanding. And it's not particularly helpful. So what you're hearing politicians saying is that we need lots of knife arches. I mean, if you think about it practically, what happens if you're taking your laptop to work and the bleep goes off? What's going to happen? And people haven't really thought these things through. Are we going to have searches? Are we going to slow things down entirely for people to go in and out of stations? And then in terms of mass stop and search, police officers, I certainly would want people to be in the areas of high crime where there's issues, and where stop and search may be one of the tactics that we use to try and deal with that. So I think some of these suggestions that are being made by politicians are made by people who don't understand operational policing and don't really have not really thought through the consequences of what they're suggesting.
All right, interesting take from you there, Dal Babu, former Metropolitan Police Chief Superintendent. Thank you for coming on.